Clashes between pro-Beijing demonstrators and Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters have broken out in a crowded shopping area, the most recent skirmishes in months of protests in the city. Hundreds of pro-Beijing demonstrators waved Chinese flags and chanted slogans at Amoy Plaza in the densely packed Kowloon district. For the latest on these clashes, let's cross live to our correspondent, Patrick Falk. A very good morning to you, Patrick. We saw these images of fighting in that shopping mall. What spiked these recent clashes?
Yeah, well, that's partly what spurred this massive rally that's taking place today. This was originally a march that was organized by the Civil Human Rights Front. That's the organizers of some of the big rallies that we've seen over the past few months. It was originally turned down. The application to proceed was turned down by the police, but people have defied that ban. They are out here in enormous numbers. We're hearing tens of thousands, but it certainly doesn't feel dissimilar to some of the million-man marches or the alleged million-man marches that we saw at the beginning of this movement 3 months ago. And a lot of them are absolutely furious with some of the things that happened yesterday in the shopping malls and also in certain parts of town where pro-Beijing demonstrators beat up protesters. Images of that are circulating around online, and a lot of people feel that the police were doing very little about it. So that is perhaps what's prompted the scale of today's march, and it's an indication to the government that this movement is still very strong indeed.
What's happening at the moment as we speak?
Yeah, well, as I say, people have been streaming through from Causeway Bay to the east of the island. They're heading westwards. Some of them were headed in the direction of the Beijing liaison office, which will be a concern to authorities. But some of them are now exiting through Chater Garden, which is just behind me. There is an underground exit in Chater Garden, so some of them will be headed that way. There are some reports of some unrest going on right now. Some protesters have blocked underground exits, so there's likely to be some traffic disruption. We're also hearing reports of people defacing and setting alight Chinese national flags. As we know, we are approaching an important date in the Chinese calendar, October 1st, which is National Day, when China will be celebrating the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. And there are a lot of flags and banners that are being put up across not just parts of China, but also across Hong Kong as well. Hard to say whether or not the people or the organizations that are putting up these banners are doing it simply because this is a landmark occasion for China, or if it's also because they want to counter this protest movement and show a sense of patriotism in Hong Kong as well.
Are the authorities and police coping with this situation? Are they not overwhelmed?
Well, for the time being, as I say, there have been some reports of a little bit of unrest, but generally speaking, it does appear to be relatively calm. There are some police around the area. They've cordoned off several roads. A lot of the protesters actually on their way here have to walk past Wan Chai police station, which is about a kilometre away from me in that direction. And of course, as I say, there's a lot of anger towards the officers. So you're hearing a lot of people hurl expletives at the police, something that isn't new, but you know, the anger towards the police has grown as the weeks have gone by. As we know, the protesters are calling for a probe into police action, and as the government continues to ignore that demand, the calls have grown, and in turn some of the police force has grown as well, as they've found it more and more difficult to control this protest movement.
So Patrick, can we take it at this moment that there really isn't any end in sight in terms of these protests?
Yeah, well, it has actually been a relatively calm week in Hong Kong. On Wednesday, in fact, demonstrations were called off by protesters as a mark of respect to the US, who were noting or marking the anniversary of 9/11, of course. But, you know, I think that we saw over this weekend, on Friday was Mid-Autumn Festival. There were some huge numbers of people. Instead of going home for family dinner, which is what they would normally do at this time of year, they came out and protested across some key hillsides across Hong Kong, holding up lanterns, which is one of the things you do during a Mid-Autumn Festival. And that's a real show of the strength of this movement still, and aimed at pressuring the government. And so this weekend we're seeing once again that the momentum is still very strong indeed. There are huge numbers of people coming out here today, and as you say, there is perhaps no end in sight for the time being. We're certainly likely to see this overlap with October 1st, I would say.
And just finally, Patrick, the last time we spoke to you, the protest had moved to the airport and flights coming in and out of Hong Kong were disrupted. What's the latest in that regard?
Well, yesterday there was meant to be some sort of protest action around disrupting air travel. That didn't seem to happen, and some of the protesters have been a little bit more cautious because of the increased use of force by police. So there was no disruption to flights as far as we understand yesterday, but there was also some data that just came out today that said that passenger numbers or passengers going through Hong Kong International Airport had dropped by around 12% in August compared to a year ago. So that is an indication of just how badly the protest movement has caused disruptions to air travel in Hong Kong. And of course, a lot of international travellers are very concerned about flying through Hong Kong. And, you know, in recent weeks that have gone by, there have been some huge disruptions. At one point, there was a massive traffic jam that went from the airport all the way to the bridge that leads to the airport, and a lot of people were stuck in that. And you know, you can imagine it was very, very difficult indeed for people that were visiting the city.
What are the impacts on everyday life?
Well, the impact on everyday life is ongoing in a lot of different ways. Businesses are being affected. There are arguments between a lot of people who have different family members who have different views about the political situation in Hong Kong. Of course, school term has started now, and there has been a weekly class boycott among a lot of students. We're likely to see that again tomorrow, with people either refusing to go to class altogether. Last week, they symbolically, some of them, turned up 5 minutes late to class as a nod to the 5 demands. Of course, one of those demands has sort of been met now. The chief executive has agreed to withdraw the bill. That isn't going to happen until October, when the Legislative Council opens, though, and there is still concern that pro-Beijing lawmakers may turn that down. So, as I say, the protesters still have their 4 demands that they want met, and they're not going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you so much for that update. Patrick Falk is coming to us live from Hong Kong.